Alright, hello everyone and welcome to another stream, or to be more precise, the continuation of the stream from 2 days ago where when I've lost my internet connection and the stream abruptly stopped. So we're going to continue the coverage of all the games I've played using the chessable course. We finished part 1 against FMs, we finished part 2 against IMs. And now it's time to see how Grandmasters deal with 1d6, and without further ado, let's go. Part 3, Grandmasters against 1d6. I'm gonna flip board for a start. This is the most recent game I've played. Hello to Sasha, welcome. International Masters can see now how GMs deal with 1d6. So this was my most recent game. It was played like 2 weeks ago in the Hungarian Team Championship, or 10 days ago, where I've played against József Horváth, who is an experienced GM. I'm not sure, I think he's about 60 years old, but he, like 10 years ago, he was almost 2600, 2550. So he's a very good player. And I was black. Now his rating dropped to like 2400, but it doesn't change much. So he's still a force to be reckoned with. Hello to Adrian. No, it wasn't 3 days in a row. Yesterday I didn't stream. I had internet problems. Anyway, after e5, my opponent decides to take d takes e5, and we already had one game where an international master rated 2420 did this, and did the exact same thing with bishop c4, king e8, f4, went for the line suggested by Anish Giri in his chessable course, which is, according to him, slightly better for white, according to me, dead equal. So after f4, I was just following the line which I suggested in the course, or we suggested in the course. Shout out to Mircea, the co-author. Knight f3, knight c5, and we've had the same line, rook e1, knight d3, cd, knight d6, and in that last game we have seen c4 played, bishop e6, bishop b2, ef4, bishop g7, and so on. And in this game my opponent decides to test me with knight takes e5, and this is the second critical continuation, because here you need to know what you're doing. If you play, for example, bishop e6, you will end in trouble after g4. And the only move, which you have to know, but if you know it you're completely fine, is king to d8, where after bishop a3 you're going to play bishop e6 then, and then after g4 you can freely go f6 or rook e8 even if needed. Anyway, I will not, considering this is all covered in the course, I will not spend too much time on theory, but again, no problems out of the opening. My opponent goes for c4, which makes sense, restricting the knight, also making sure that the bishop gets some squares, some diagonals, bishop b2, and so on. I play bishop e6, finishing my development. I want to go rook e8, f6, and black is totally fine, but of course, considering the position is dry, it's very hard to play for something. Bishop b2 is played, rook e8. Of course, I had to think about some things, for example, about c5 followed by c6, but I thought that I will be just fine after b6, and then the bishop will come to d5 and maybe knight d4. This pawn is probably going to drop after f6, so I was not that scared of these motives. Bishop a3 also, I go rook e8, or I even go f6 maybe at this moment, as after knight g6 or knight c6. I can always either take, or knight c6, even king d7 was an option. I think many things equalize here. My opponent goes bishop b2, I go rook e8, simply continuing with my plan. King f2, f6, knight f3. Yeah, and the position is like the opposite colored bishops are there. There's a small weakness on d3 for white, so objectively I prefer black a little bit, but it's not much. And now I play the move c5 so that the knight cannot go to d4 anymore, and it's a little bit of a restricting move. My opponent plays h3, I play h5, I don't want to allow g4 followed by f5 if I don't really have to. My opponent goes bishop c3, I go king c7, could have gone king d7 as well, And now my opponent decides to play g4, which is quite a nice move, because I was already starting to feel ambitious here. With some moves like king c6, a6, b5, maybe I can start pushing my own pawns here. But this g4 is a very nice way to solve all of the problems. Some calculation is needed though, because after hg, hg, I can play bishop takes g4. I can also take bishop takes c4, which I did in the game. But after bishop g4, yeah, now there is a choice between rook e8 and rook g1, but rook e8 I can take with the knight, and then this pawn on g7 is defended, so my opponent would go rook g1, but after bishop f3, rook g7, here king takes, knight f5, rook f7, not rook g6 because of knight h4. I mean, I cannot really hurt this king, and my king is also exposed, and I will drop the f6 pawn, so I can just be worse. Not sure if I'm actually worse or if it's equalish, but there was something else I planned against this, which was bishop takes c4. An interesting transition into the endgame, because now d4, I get d4 square. My opponent has to take, and they go knight e4, and I will regain the bishop. If my opponent lets me, then I will just be a pawn up, so he has to take rook e4, and now I got a rook and a pawn for 2 minor pieces, but one more pawn is dropping off, whether it's f4 or it's c4. So yeah, I do get material balance, if not even more than material balance, but still, unfortunately, because of this fixed structure and 3 against 2, I don't have much, and my opponent very smartly plays knight d2, rook f4, king g3. I saw all of this in advance, that I have g5, otherwise the rook would be trapped, but there is this pretty nice move, rook to e1, rook to f1, which solves all of the problems, because if any other move is played, then I can go rook d8, rook d3, and suddenly I'm probably winning. So, but my opponent is just in time with rook f1, forcing the trade, and when I go rook f8, it was also possible maybe to go king d7, but it wouldn't change much, because rook f1 there is, no, bishop f6 there is rook f8 and rook f1 later on. But I went rook f8 immediately, because I also want to hint at the idea of f5, and also after king d7 there is an additional option for my opponent to go here, and then knight e4 with a double attack, which after rook f8, which I played in the game, is not possible, because then after knight d2 I would go f5, and I would create something. I'm not sure if it's much, but after knight d3, which is most logical, king d6, king here, king e6, king e4, suddenly white has managed to achieve a nice blockade, and there is not too much I can do. And I tried shuffling around a bit, rook h8, knight d5, rook h2, hoping that my opponent would get into some knight f6 or bishop f6, then I would take a2 and start pushing my a pawn, and there would be some race. That was my hope, but unfortunately my opponent can just go a4, rook a2, a5, and yeah, just not in time. I went rook a4, he goes knight d3, and he just holds the position. I tried to exchange these pawns, but no matter, I cannot really make the b5 breakthrough in a good way without f6 hanging after knight d5, and I cannot get f5 because it's very nicely controlled, and after some moves we agreed to a draw because the position is objectively completely equal. So 0 problems out of the opening. But then again, this line with the exchange stuff with f4 suggested by Nishgiri can be a nuisance if you want to play for a win against low-rated players. Okay, let's see what else happened. Oh, by the way, there are 2 more games which I have not put here. One was against GM Estipenko, the other one was against GM Mywald, and those 2 games I've already analyzed on my YouTube channel and on my Twitch. So you can find separate videos on them there. Here we're going to cover all the other games which have not been covered thus far. Couldn't you try to win the endgame if you don't go b5? Not really. I mean, what else can I play? Not much else I can do, because he's just gonna go king d3, king e4, and yeah, can even get in danger if he goes king here and then king b3 and my rook gets trapped. I mean, I cannot really find a motive to play for a win, unfortunately. Rook a2, rook f2 for starters. This one. Yeah, I want rook f2, rook f4, but you're still going to have some problems. Let's say Okay, first of all, it can be stopped with king f3, but let's say I go knight d5. You said you want to go here. Now, I remember that I was completely unsure about bishop f6 as well. So rook f6, knight f6. Sorry, knight f6 takes, king d5. And then, yeah, you can even lose after some a6 or even ab followed by king c6. But I'm pretty sure I have no winning chances. I forgot a bit what exactly I looked at, but I think this can be very dangerous. Yeah, I had time. I looked at all the options. Of course, black was always the one pressing for a win, but in this game, I like, what more can you ask for with black against GMs? But yeah, not enough motives to play for a win. Okay, now we keep on going, and the next game is going to be the game I played against GM Kozak from Hungary. And this was played about a year ago on the Hungarian League. My elo is 600. How do I get better? Work. Play, solve puzzles, learn openings. That's how you get better. Constant work. So in this game, the fiddler is featured. This was probably my second game where I played 1d6 in my life. After that game against Milan party, knight f3, knight bd7, and here my opponent goes g3. Well, it's easier here, if you have the course, it's easier to just go g6 and transpose to the King's Indian chapter, with bishop g7 in the course. In this game, I decided to go for c6, which is an alternative option given. c6, trying to go b5 and developing the bishop on e7. Nothing wrong with this at all. It can even transpose to the course after a4, bishop e7, bishop g2, cd, ed, knight d, d5, and so on. It was not. It's not a transposition because in that line the knight is still on b8 and you can go knight c6 later on. Anyway, c6. My opponent goes bishop g2. This was a surprise to me because in general, when the opponent allows you to play b5 in the fiddler, you're fine. That's some kind of a rule of thumb. Maybe still white has some ideas, but still this knight gets restricted and you seize more space and you'll get in bishop b7, and yeah, I was already quite happy here. My opponent castles, I go bishop e7, normal developing moves, rook e1, castles, and now he goes for this a4 move, which has its merits but also has its drawbacks. The good thing with this is that after b4, knight b1, he gets the c4 square for his pieces in the future, but then again, he played knight c3, knight b1, knight d2, and spent some time on this. So that's a downside. And of course, I just continue with developing normally, a5 to support the b4 pawn. My opponent goes c3, and I just go bishop a6. I'm not that scared of c takes b4, a takes b4. I can, whenever I want, go either c5 or ed, maybe c5. This pawn is just not a problem, it's not vulnerable at all. I can also go queen b6 later on, maybe c5 by myself. d5 is sometimes an idea, and I was never afraid of this. My opponent, that's why I went b3. b3 is an interesting strategical move because my opponent wants to go c4, and I have a choice between b takes c3, which I played, and the normal move, like for example c5, supporting everything. But now after c5, for example, d takes c4, the structure is quite blocked. This knight is quite far away from d5, but my knight is also far away from d4, and also this hangs, and it felt like quite a dry position. I think both options are fine, but I chose to take bc, knight c, even though I brought my opponent's piece into play. At least now my bishop is active. If white's pawn was in c4, it would not be. And also this knight is very restricted because of the pawn in c6. So I went rook b8, targeting the weakness, bishop a3, rook e8. The point of this is that I can develop my queen to b6 or c7. And then there is, for example, I cannot do it yet because there is d5. No, not d5. Okay, d5 maybe. Then I have to take with the knight. Then this weakness remains. I would prefer to take the pawn. And okay, that's why I went rook e8, so that I can always take with the rook if needed. Also, there are ideas with bishop f8, ed4, maybe to attack the e4 pawn later on. It's surely a prophylactic useful move. Rook b1. I went queen c7, queen c2. We're both developing our pieces. Now I went to a7, targeting the d4 pawn. And also, I'm going away from all kinds of knight d5 and knight b5 threats, because my queen is pinned here. Queen a7, rook d1, bishop f8, prophylaxis again, h3, rook e c8. Now I may hint at c5, c4, but it's not really, it's not really, like, it depends on what my opponent is going to do. And my opponent went bishop b2, and here I went back, rook e8, bishop a1. My opponent doesn't want to repeat, he's just trying to play for a win. Now I went rook b c8. I wasn't sure what to do, so I was just shuffling the rooks. And maybe now with the bishop on a1, this is a better option than with the bishop on a3, simply because the bishop is less active and it hits this pawn on e5. My opponent takes d5, d5, and now goes for knight a2. This plan was quite surprising to me. Okay, the knight was restricted, but I'm not sure whether he wants to go b4 or and create the a pass pawn, or maybe go knight c1, knight d3, attack this pawn. But the plan is slow, and it gives me a chance to react, and I reacted with c5, because now no matter what he plays, I'm going to go c4 next move. He went knight c3 back, then I went c4, but even if he goes some knight b2, I would still go c4. If knight c4, then I would go knight b6, and then overload this piece, and yeah, simply because of the pin, it would be very hard for white to deal with this. Bishop f1, same thing. I would take and go c4 followed by knight c5 or knight b6. But my opponent goes here, c4 takes, bishop takes c4, and now, yeah, I mean, when you look at the pieces, this bishop is quite passive. This bishop, I mean, it's on the long diagonal. It attacks c5, but still, it's not a great piece. And my bishop can go to b4 or to c5, and my queen is more active, my rook is more active, his rooks are also fine, but black is the one who is pressing in this position. So I was definitely very happy here. Knight d2 is played. Now we went bishop e2, simply to remove the rook from d1. It's better that my opponent's rook is on e1 than on an open file. Then I went back. Queen a2 was played. Now I went bishop b4. Maybe it was better to go bishop c5 first, simply because then my opponent would have to play either knight b3 or move the knight somewhere to defend this pawn. And when I played this immediately, then he was able to play knight b5 in a better way, because now after knight b5, it's if the bishop was on c5, it would be a little bit better. Okay, I can show this. For example, if they go here, then I go bishop b4. Now knight b5 is not even an option because the rook is hanging. And if my opponent goes, for example, here, and I go bishop b4, it's still, for example, he can play some rook e3, rook c1, or something. But at least this is a much better version than when I allowed knight b5. But okay, we were in time trouble. I remember we didn't have too much time, so mistakes happen. I allow knight b5. He goes for it. I play queen c5. My opponent goes bishop f1. I go bishop b7, attacking, not really attacking e4, but threatening bishop d2 and bishop in knight e4. Rook e3 is played, queen c2, and now I'm basically forcing a queen trade. My opponent should take and go knight c4, and then I take e4, and there is quite a big fight still left. But black is the one pressing for a win. But my opponent goes rook b2, which was very surprising to me because it allows queen d1 with the threat of rook c1. And yeah, my opponent now, out of desperation, okay, he had 30 seconds on the clock. It was maybe possible to still play knight d6, bishop takes d6, rook b7, rook c2. But yeah, I mean, then rook b2, but still, then I would go rook c1 probably. It still looks very, very unpleasant. My opponent takes on b4, a b4, and goes knight d6 like this. But here I just go rook f8, knight takes, rook takes, and now just there are too many threats. Rook c2 is coming, rook c1 is a threat, knight c5 with knight e4 can be, but rook c2 is what he cannot stop. And after knight e3, now rook c2 is good, but rook c1 is even stronger. And now after rook e1, queen f3, and bishop e4, rook c8, knight f8, the game was over. So yeah, I was quite happy with this. There were zero problems out of the opening, and yeah, okay, it was about an equal position out of the opening, and then my opponent overpressed, and I've proven that 1d6 can work against GMs. So I was happy with this game. So what else was happening? This game was played after I've played already like 10 or 15 games with 1d6. I was playing against GM Indjic from Serbia, who I played many times, and I knew that this is going to be a hard game because he's always extremely well prepared. Opening theory is by far his best strength in chess, and yeah, I was sure that he's going to surprise me somewhere, and he did. He played rook g1, c6, g4, h6, and then he went queen e2. This move I had never seen before that game. I've only seen bishop e3, h3, a3, h4. Those moves. Queen e2 wasn't new to me. After the game, we of course updated the course, and now everything is covered there. That you should go queen to b6 there, queen to b6 now. But I didn't know at that time. I played b5. My opponent went a3, and now I played bishop to b7, which is in itself a logical move, but it's not. It's definitely not. It's very slow here. Simply because my opponent can just go h4 and then g5. And why is this such a problem? For example, when in the bishop e3 lines, if the queen, if instead of queen e2, the main lines with bishop e3 are played, then simply you're in time with bishop e7 and knight f8, and then the g4, you can put the knight in the g4 square, and then the e3 bishop is hanging later on, and here it's not. So this was a big problem, and if I am to play something like this, then at least I should play with a5, bishop a6 to gain some initiative. But yeah, in an over the board game, if you have never seen a line before, this was the first time I actually suffered because of playing 1d6 after like 10 or 15 games where they actually prepared something. Bishop b7, and then after h4 it was a very hard position for me. I played g6, and after g5, hg takes knight h5. Simply this knight is quite out of play. It loses control over the center, the d5 and the e4 squares. And yeah, my opponent can just develop normally. Bishop e3, queen c7, long castles. His moves played by themselves, and I have to suffer. So I played bishop e7, he went bishop h3, knight b6. But yeah, I have less space and my pieces are quite cramped, and I'm not sure where I'm going to castle. If I castle short, then he's gonna go bishop g4, take the knight, and so on. I cannot even long castle. I could have long castled here, but then there was d5 followed by rook d7, rook d1, and many possibilities. d5 is also a big nuisance. So yeah, I decided to leave the king in the center for now. They went rook d8, but objectively I'm lost ever since move 15 or move 10 after the opening. And yeah, my opponent went d5 here. It's just one of the good moves. He can also go king b1, bishop c1, b3, some slow plan, but d5 is quite good. Knight takes c3, fe. Now I went rook b8, hoping for some a5, b4 in the future, but after bishop h5, gh, I simply lose the f5 square, and he can go with the knight there. cd5, knight f5. Simply my king is too weak. I tried something, but objectively it's very much resignable. So yeah, I lost after a couple of moves. I let the checkmate. Sometimes I do that when my opponent crushes me out of respect. At least in over the board games. So yeah, the problem was that I simply didn't know this, and the correct continuation here, as you can see in the course, is to go here, take c takes d5, ed, queen a5, and then after knight d4, knight takes d5. There are many lines like this. Then you go How do you go? I think you go here. And then there is some rook g3, there is some long castles. It's still a very dangerous position. But yeah, you need to be ready for this line as well, especially after this game. Next game against Grandmaster Brkic, 26-26. Rated opponent, strong player, gracious number 2 player, goes e4. We enter the mainline fielder, knight d7, bishop c4. Bishop e7, he goes a4, castles. The main line of the fielder, he always plays principal chess, and it was up to me to prove that the course can hold. Hello to Cat's Revenge TV. Now I took e4. The c6 line, I also played against him once. The c6 line, this is definitely going to be one of the next games. I'll analyze it. But in this game I played d4, knight d4 here, bishop a2, knight c6, all part of the course. There is h3, rook e1, bishop f4, and here there is also this move knight c6, which he played. Personally, I'm not a big fan of this move for white, because after bc6, black's center is reinforced, the knight is quite restricted, and the b file can also be used. So, but of course the structure is a bit weakened, so there is a point to it. But I was never feeling that much danger from this move. Opponent goes rook e1, playing a normal move, maybe hinting at e5. I go rook b8. I'm not too scared of e5. After e5 I can even go knight d7, but maybe it's better to take, rook takes, bishop d6, and then just play bishop f5 next move. I have quite a lot of counterplay. So my opponent goes bishop c4, and while this play might seem strange, like bishop c4, bishop a2, bishop c4, he wants to solidify with b3, bishop b2, and also I will spend some time with knight d7, knight d5, knight c6, so there is a point. But then again, I just played knight to d7 here, he goes b3, I go bishop f6, he goes bishop b2, I went knight c5, I put all the pieces on the normal squares, bishop e6, maybe bishop e5, queen e6, a5 to solidify. I never felt like there were any problems in this game. Queen f3, bishop e6, bishop f1. If my opponent takes, then I would even get the f file, so here I would be very happy. With the open f file, maybe hint on bishop d4, e5. This would be very good if I can achieve it. But of course my opponent doesn't want to allow this. Now I want bishop e5, maybe queen g5 or queen f6 are the moves. He goes knight d1, queen g5, bishop takes, queen c3. I took, knight c3, I went a5, finally to solidify the structure, so there is no more b4, a5 in the future. That would maybe leave me with less space, which I don't really enjoy. He goes f3, rook e8, knight e2, bishop d7, rook d1, g6, and in this endgame, after a few moves, we just made a draw, which was quite good for me. I played against a high-rated opponent, had no problems whatsoever, and yeah, this game definitely showed that the d4 line is something. If a 26-25 rated opponent is struggling against it, it means the line has at least potential and can be used at a high level. After this game, there was this game, which is a painful memory for me, against Grandmaster Mateusz Bartel, one of Poland's strongest players, where we had the fielder knight f3, knight d7, bishop c4. He went for the main line, but after a4, ed4, he took with the queen. This is the second choice, not to allow knight e5, but just to play queen takes, and maybe then later go bishop g5 or bishop f4, then rook e1, rook d1, just play for more space. But of course, after knight c5, this is all analyzed in the course, and I think black doesn't have any real problems. h3, this is played usually just to stop bishop g4, because for example after some a5 you can go bishop g4, and then you force the opponent to either move the knight or you take on f3 and destroy their pawn structure. So that's why they spend the move usually on h3. Here bishop e6 is fine, c6 is also fine, both are given in the course from different move orders. I went c6 in this game, rook d1, this is the most precise, because after rook e1, I'm going to show you one nice line, knight takes, and then d5. and you immediately at least equalized, if I would already prefer black, because after knight f6, bishop f6, you're just gonna take dc4, be left with a bishop pair, and if your opponent takes bishop d5, knight d5, it's a similar story. So that's why rook d1 is more logical, but of course then the a1 rook is a little bit of a problem. You would prefer one rook on d1, the other one on e1, but you don't have time for this. So rook d1 trying to go bishop f4. I went bishop e6, and now to my surprise he went bishop e3. Bishop f4 is the main move, and the line goes a5, and if your opponent takes on d6, queen d6, queen d6, bishop d6, bishop e6, this is all covered in the course. Now there is bishop f4, but bishop c7 is even stronger, and after bishop c4 you can go rook a to e8, and yeah, basically get this pawn back. Also an alternative to this is e5. After this you can take here, and yeah, there are no real problems here for black, at least not objectively speaking. There are some games, but yeah, I was expecting this. My opponent goes bishop e3. Now I'm on my own, but at least I know the plans. And okay, here I went first queen c7. I could have gone a5 as well. I could have gone even queen c8, trying to go bishop takes c4 and queen e6. This will be seen in my game against Firouzja, where I've played that plan. And queen c7 is probably also very fine. My opponent takes, goes queen c4. And now he just wants to maybe play knight d4, double the rooks on the d file, and claim that my weakness on d6 is a problem. Now I went rook e8. My idea is to play rook e8, bishop f8, and increase the attack on the e4 pawn. My opponent goes here. I go bishop f8. Very logical. If my opponent takes knight e6, then I will take rook e6, and then I'll be able to go rook a to e8 in one move. Knight f5 was played, and here there are many interesting moves. Like you can go rook d8, you can go many things, but I really like this move h5, which seems very logical at first, but when you look at it more closely, next move, whatever he goes, it took me some time to find this move, but whatever he does, I'm going to go g6. And the problem with g6 at first was that then my opponent can go knight h6, and then when I go king g7, this knight can create some problems. It's not so easy to get rid of it, and I wasn't sure what my next move is. For example, if he goes rook d2, rook d1. This construction, there are some old games where this construction is used, like one that comes to my mind is Najmuddin Tal with this knight on h6 creating problems. So yeah, I didn't want to allow this, and when I play h5, my opponent goes bishop, okay, he went bishop d4, but now if he goes rook d2, I go g6, knight h6, now I just go king h7, and no harm done, no problem, and this knight remains trapped. So that was the point of h5. My opponent goes bishop d4. This was a surprising move to me because it gives the bishop pair. So I took it, and I went rook e6. Next move I'll go rook e8, rook d1, g6 now, knight h4. Now I went queen e7 first. The problem with rook e8 was I was a little bit scared of knight f3 trying to go knight g5. And if I go queen e7 and my opponent goes knight f3, then I can go knight d7 in a better way, because this is now covered, the g5 square is covered, and I can choose between bishop g7 and knight c5 next move. So yeah, to queen e7 I was quite happy. And my opponent went a5 here. This move I was very surprised at, because it doesn't do much. It wants like, not eat, eat this move, but my opponent, he wants to play a6 and destabilize my structure. But okay, so I played rook a to e8, and he played a6. And here, black's position is objectively totally winning. And there are even several good ways of handling this. And I was up on the clock, I was 20 minutes up on the clock. And the first thing I missed was b5, queen c6, and now I was only looking at b4, knight d5, and it wasn't so clean to me. Or even knight b5, or knight d5, it didn't look so clean to me. But there is a very easy solution to this. You go rook b8. and then you go rook b6 or d5 next move, and the queen will basically get trapped. It's very, very easy, actually. I just didn't see it. That was the first thing I didn't see. The second thing I saw but didn't evaluate correctly was this c5 thing, because after c5 he has to take on g6. I take, he takes on d6, and yeah, now he does have some attacking stuff with e5, knight d4, and so on, but objectively this is just I should just take b takes a6, e4, and then play this move which I didn't see, queen f7, or maybe I remember seeing it in some different line, but somehow I missed it here. And yeah, objectively the position it's just lost for him here, because no matter if he takes here first, or there is this trick where I just win the queen. I even remember seeing this motive, but maybe not in this exact line. So this was the second problem, and the third thing I missed was d5, which I played. It's also winning. ed, rook e1 check, which I didn't play. I took cd5, and I didn't see a win here, because after rook e1 takes queen to f1, there is this move bishop c5, and after rook f4, the only way to defend the f2 pawn, I can just no, wait, how was I? Yeah, it was rook f4, and yeah, bishop d6, I think. Rook f6, bishop h2 was. I think that's why after bishop d6. Yeah, that's why after bishop d6 I was just winning. Yeah, that was the point. I forgot a little bit about those games. Yeah. Also, if my opponent goes king h2, then there is knight g4. This one is relatively easy, or rook g4. hg, of course. So yeah, I had several relatively easy wins here. Didn't see any for some reason, and after d5, cd, ed, cd, knight takes. Bishop g7, rook c4, rook a6. I'm still a bit better because the bishop is stronger than the knight on h4. But yeah, after bishop e5, g3, we made a draw here. I accepted the draw because I had 1 minute and my opponent had like 5 or 6. I can go for something like this, queen f3, rook d1, queen d1, and then play some bishop c7, but my opponent will probably play knight g2, knight d3, or knight f3, king g2, and it's not much, objectively. So this game brings painful memories because I outplayed my opponent out of the opening completely, and I had a great position, then it screwed up tactically. Okay. My second match against Grandmaster Brkic featured the same thing as the first one, except that I chose the c6 line, the alternative from the course, and not e takes d4. And then he played h3, a5, rook e1, and we followed this line with queen d6, queen d4, knight b6, bishop a2. As we have said 2 days ago, after bishop b3 there is knight at d7, but after bishop a2 you basically have to go d5 in order to equalize. And after ed, knight d, we played this endgame, bishop f4, bishop f5, and here he went queen d2. He didn't play c3 like in the other game we've had, queen d2. And here I was not that familiar with the ideas. I played bishop e4, knight d4, but I wasn't that familiar with where my pieces are supposed to stand, and they're supposed to stand bishop c5, queen b6, or maybe rook a6. But I put the bishop on f6, which is definitely not ideal, because now now my squares here are quite weak. d6 and the c7 square, they are weak, and when the knight comes to b5 it can be a problem. So that's why after c3 I decided to eliminate the knight, take, and go rook c8. This position is objectively worse for black. I'm not sure how much worse. The engines probably hold it quite easily, but I do have the isolated pawn, and I have a little bit of less space. So yeah, he definitely achieved something out of the opening in this game. In the other one where I went ed4, he didn't achieve anything. In this one he did. And after f3, bishop g6, bishop e3, queen d7, queen b6, rook a8, he was just pressing, and here it was quite surprising to me that he went bishop d4 and not bishop c5. I even asked him after the game bishop c5 because this felt quite unpleasant. I go rook c8, then he goes rook e7, queen c6, and bishop d4. And now I think bishop d4, at least if I remember correctly. Because after queen b6, bishop b6, my position is still passive, b7 is hanging, and so on. And if I play rook e8, I don't have a good capture. Rook e8, if I take with the rook, a5 hangs. If I take with the queen, b7 hangs. And okay, even though this some position like this, maybe it's holdable, maybe it's even easily holdable, it's still a pawn down. So for that reason, I was very surprised. Okay, here I could have gone maybe rook e8. It would be probably much easier to draw like this. But yeah, after he played bishop d4 and I went f6, now it's not really the same anymore. Now after bishop c5, rook e8, rook takes c8, I can take with the bishop. Now everything is defended. Maybe he forgot about this, not sure. But yeah, after rook e3, now I went rook e8, we traded off, queen c6, bishop d7, rook e7, we traded everything, and the game ended in a draw. So this was not the cleanest way to draw, but still, this endgame, as I've said, is one of the parts of the course where if your opponent actually knows all of this and enters this endgame, then they could have a little bit of a pressing, although objectively it's equal. So yeah, bishop c5 is the move here. That was this game. And then there was this game, which was quite painful for me, against Grandmaster Indjic from Serbia. c4, d6, knight c3, e5. We played this, and then he didn't go for the English rat with d4, the transposition. He played e3, I played knight f6, and he played h4. Something I have never seen before, and something that was completely new to me. However, there are almost no games. However, it still has a point, trying to ask me to make a move, then go d4, and then after e4, knight g5 with some kind of an English rat, where I already have the knight on f6, which creates a little bit of a difference, because in the usual lines in the English rat I play c6, bishop e7 first. I don't have the knight on f6. So I play bishop e7, a logical move, and after d4 I went e4 here, but I should not have done this and go for the English rat, even though this was also fine. But there is a way easier solution. I was supposed to think outside of the box and just go knight g4, because now this knight cannot be removed, and if my opponent ever takes d, queen d8, bishop d8, I get this endgame, which is quite nice, where I'll just follow up with c6, bishop e6, and yeah, this knight cannot be touched, and the e5 pawn is well defended. Yeah, this was quite... But e4, which I played, was also fine objectively. Knight g5, c6. Now we have kind of a version of an English rat. But after I went knight a6, knight a4, knight c7, he went d5, and somehow it was not ideal. Maybe for all of this reasoning, I should have played bishop e6 in this. It's not really bishop e6, bishop f7 is not really a part of this setup. With the English rat, you usually leave the bishop on c8, and I was following the familiar setup, but here maybe I was just supposed to play this, because it controls d5 in a better way, and later just after, if he plays d5 now, then I can maybe go for castles, and then knight bd7, knight e5, because a big difference which you can notice after knight a6 and knight c7, after d5 this knight is quite stuck, it cannot go to any squares. And if it was on d7, it would be able to go to e5. So that was surely something I should have done better in this game. My opponent went here, I castled, he went b3. Now I took cd5, which was probably a mistake. I should go knight g4, bishop f6, knight e5, just try to use the squares. But why I played this because I blundered something. I blundered that after takes, knight takes, king takes. King h8, bishop b2, bishop f6. Here I would be fine if there was not for one move which I missed 5 moves ago, and that was long castles. I simply didn't see this move, and after this I'm basically busted. There is not much I can do because my d6 pawn is extremely weak, and of course I could have done something else here. I could have played maybe bishop e6, went for this more solid setup, which is of course still worse for me because my opponent has the bishop pair, but it's not that much worse. I have the better development. I'll go queen f7, d5. It's not that bad, but yeah, this was just one move blunder, because when I was entering all of this, I missed long castles at this point. So basically, I made one bad decision after another in this game, and after 5 bad decisions, your position is just unholdable, or unhandleable, whatever you want to say. I went b6 here, bishop e2, bishop b7. I was trying to hold this position for some time, but simply this rook, this pawn on d6 is quite weak, and I don't think I can objectively hold. This rook c1 might look strange, but my opponent is just in time with b4 and c5, for example. If I go king up, then my opponent can go even immediately c5, sorry about that. And if he goes rook c8, then he can go first b4, and then go here. Then he can go either immediately c5 or maybe rook d1 and then c5. I'm just suffering and struggling quite a lot. So because of that, after rook c1 I went f4, trying to search for counterplay, but after c5 he's just in time. Because after takes, rook c5, fe3, fe3, I just don't have a great move. He managed to open the c file. If I go rook f2, he's gonna go rook to c2. b2, there is of course bishop c4. Can go d5, but then he's just gonna go bishop sour. Not probably g4 is the best. And then I will have to suffer in this endgame where his king is gonna go to d4. He can just push these 2 versus 1, and my bishop is really bad. So objectively, it has to be lost, I think. So I tried dc5, takes king f7, trying to at least bring the king closer, and then go rook f2 for some rook endgame. If I exchange enough pawns, it might be a draw, but unfortunately, he found the only win here with king c3. Rook e3 and king d2. This was very, very nice because it restricts my rook. Rook d2, rook d3, king e2, and first he passivized my rook, and now he's going to capture one of these pawns. And yeah, this was very nicely played. I tried c4 and rook a3, but he can just push the pawn, and yeah, it's just completely lost for me. There's not much I can do. He will just promote the h-pawn. So this was a very bitter game, but the opening was absolutely not a problem. It was just that I started making one bad strategical decision after another. And now, I think this is the last tournament game against GMs, where I faced GM Bjerre from Denmark. This game was a very nice experience for me with 1d6. He surprised me, or he tried to surprise me with bishop e2, a rare sideline, bishop e7, but a4. This was given in another chessable course by GM Gustafsson, but in the course we have an improvement, and after following the line after knight c5, f3, it was only given some rook e8 or bishop d7, but there is also d5, which I played. My opponent was fortunately not familiar with this. He went e5, knight e8, and now bishop e3 is not the most critical move. The critical moves are a6 and f4. Those are of course covered in the course, and I still think black is fine. Bishop e3, f6, because now after ef6, knight f6, if any of these, this is basically a trim Philidor structure for black.